Welcome back to Sputnik. The long standoff between the USA and its neighbour Cuba, just 90 miles away, moved towards its end this week when President Obama embraced the leadership of Cuba in Havana. It had the hand of history written all over it.
But what will it mean for the US, for US-Cuban relations? And of very great importance to many of our viewers, what will it mean for Cuba? A long-standing advocate of friendship with Cuba is Rob Miller, director of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, and he joins us in a minute. But first, let's hear what the public in London think about President Obama's visit.
I think it's a good thing that America's opened up relations with Cuba again, but I think it will have very little effect on Cuba, but will probably do wonders for Obama's legacy.
If there is freedom of money coming in, there is prosperity, communism has a natural death.
When Obama lifted the sanctions, he's also brought over with him hordes of multinational, international big businessmen who are really looking at Cuba to try and turn the heads of the Cuban people away from creating their own destiny through that socialist revolution that they had and perhaps forging a new way forward, and really trying to integrate them into a capitalist economy.
Well, it seems a lot of people have an opinion on President Obama's visit in Cuba, but now it's time to hear from our expert, Rob. Rob, what's your take on President Obama's visit to Cuba?
Well, it's been a wonderful visit. It's been a great few days. I'm sure President Obama and his family, Michelle and the girls, enjoyed their time in Havana, as millions of people do every year when they go to Cuba on holiday. And I'm also sure that the Cuban people enjoyed the visit, because for the first time for a long time, you've really seen the possibilities that could come about between these two close neighbours and how that relationship could develop over time. They're very close neighbours. They should be very close friends.
They say when you open the door or window, the flies fly in. What's going to happen when nationalisation kicks in with Disneyland and goodness knows what TNC's landing in Cuba? Do you think it'll be the same place?
I think Cuba will change. I think it will change slowly. I don't think it's going to be a mad rush to embrace everything about the United States. The Cuban people are very, very strong and very, very proud of their nation and their achievements. Their achievements are well known in health, in education, in social care, internationalism and so forth. And the Cuban people are really not in the business of giving that all up overnight. They're very intelligent people, very well educated, and they've seen films of the United States. Of course, there are things people admire about the United States and things that people want, but there's also, as we all know, an awful lot of things in the United States that you could do without. And I've got two children of my own, and I know which country I would prefer them to be brought up in. Cuba's a lovely place to grow up in. It's got a vibrant, eclectic atmosphere, culture, and it's a country that I would be very proud to live in, and I know the Cuban people are very proud of that country.
Rob, we know that actually the Congress, they weren't really mad about Obama's trip. The US media, they're not mad about it. So why did Obama do it? What was in it for him?
I think, well, obviously there's a legacy for President Obama himself, and he wants to leave a positive legacy in the region. But I think the bigger picture is the relationship between the United States and the whole hemisphere. The United States has been losing influence within South America in particular, and countries such as Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, very big economies, and particularly the Chinese have been investing in the region. And I think when you've had many years now of progressive left-leaning countries, the issue of Cuba has been a real block on relations with the United States. And a couple of years ago at the Organization of American States, President Obama himself was almost excluded by the other presidents of the region. And the reason was the blockade of Cuba and the ongoing mistreatment of Cuba. So by opening up that door, opening up that relationship with Cuba, the Americans, President Obama and the business community in the United States is opening up its opportunities within the hemisphere. And that's a very, very important economic mission, if you like. And this part of that opening up and that engagement has been a very important element.
Well, I think it's positively received all over the world. I just question whether it's the same in the US itself.
Well, I think people in the United States are very open to engagement with Cuba. All the polls indicate that the people of the United States want to see normalised relations with Cuba. The key factor has been the relationship or the feelings of the people in Florida, that 1 million plus group of Cuban Americans who have driven forward that aggressive US foreign policy towards Cuba, the country they left after the revolution of 1959. That community is changing. The demographics are changing. The younger generation have grandparents, they have family relations in Cuba, and they want to go backwards and forwards.
They see Cuba in different lights.
Absolutely. And the idea of blockade is no longer relevant to them. They want to go backwards and forwards. They want to meet their families. They want to invest. They want to take up opportunities.
You said mentioned obviously blockade, but when are the sanctions really going to end? Do you see it happening soon?
Well, we want it to happen soon, but it's been a very, very long wait. The facts of the matter are that despite all the talk over the last year of rapprochement, despite the new diplomatic relations, despite Obama's visit and the 4 rounds of bilateral talks between the two countries, the blockade is very much in place. During Obama's administration alone, 49 international companies have been fined nearly $20 billion dollars in total for just trading with Cuba. My own organisation, the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, we've had our bank accounts closed by the Cooperative Bank, who have closed our bank accounts in London because of the blockade. And the chief executive of the Co-op has said it's because of the US blockade policies. Now, if you have a small organisation like the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, unable to trade with Cuba, imagine what it's like for British and international businesses who are unable to trade. So the blockade has to end. That has to be the first thing on the table.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Because is this another one of Obama's false promises? We obviously heard one of the first things he admitted he wanted to close Guantanamo. That didn't happen. Do you think this really will be a long-term strategy that will be implemented sustainably for the Cuban people?
I think we have to take President Obama at face value and see that this is something that he believes in. Now, whether that can be carried through by Congress, obviously a lot of the elements of the blockade legislation have to be reversed by Congress, but there are still more things that the United States could do. They could lift the tourism ban on their own citizens travelling to Cuba, and certainly the issue of Guantanamo has to be discussed. You can't have a normalised relationship with a country when the bigger partner is illegally occupying your land against your wishes. It's the only it's the only international base, military base in the world that's positioned in a country that doesn't want it to be there. That has to change. We can't talk about normalised relations until that happens.
Sure. And of course, the real question is, will this actually impact in terms of trade in the favour of the Cubans? Because ultimately, you know, Obama's delegation had people representatives from the likes of PayPal and several huge organisations that represent the kind of tourism and holiday and rentals and etc. So are we actually going to see sustained investment that will actually benefit Cubans?
I think we will see a change, but it will take time. I think international companies have been warned off of Cuba for many, many years. The fines, as I've said, have been horrific and massive. Only a couple of months ago, a British firm, WATG Holdings, was fined $200,000. So it's still going on. Commerce Bank, the German bank, was fined over $1 billion this year. So these fines are still in place. And that is a major factor stopping international trade. Cuba's a wonderful place to do business. It's a very stable society. It's got a very highly educated workforce, and it's a population of 11 million people, which needs investment. There are many, many opportunities for international business, and particularly US business. So it will help. The Cubans want investment. It's what they need to develop their country, and they need that development. They want it, and they need to see that progress. So it's something we hope will come out of this visit and out of the discussions that are going along at the moment.
There was this fantastic picture captured of Raul Castro holding up Obama's hand, which was supposed to be a fist bump, but Obama held his hand loose. So apart from that little incident, I think it looked quite a successful trip, this whole rapprochement. I just wondered when they stood there in Revolution Square with Che Guevara behind them, looking really literally upon them. How do you think he would have regarded this visit? And even Fidel, who's still alive, How would they have seen this?
Well, I think the Cuban people, Raúl, Fidel, the Cuban people will see it as a victory. I think they've had 50 years of aggression, and now finally the US president has come to them. The Cubans haven't given up anything. It's the United States that need to change. It's the United States unilateral blockade. It's the United States financed aggression against Cuba. So it's the United States that still has a long way to go. Cuba doesn't have to do anything to build a normalised relationship with the United States. It's a purely a one-way ticket. And we very much see this as a victory for Cuba, but the Cuban people are very patient. They've had a long period of waiting patiently and respectfully. They're not asking for anything special. They're purely asking for a normal relationship with a neighbour based on mutual respect and understanding.
Well, the Cuba Solidarity Campaign has no doubt been a neighbour of the Cuban people for many, many years. What does this mean for you as an organisation now, obviously, with these steps in the right direction? What's the future for you guys?
Well, as I said, there's still a long way to go with the blockade. With Guantanamo, there are still a number of issues around the migration issues, the Cuban Adjustment Act, the wet foot, dry foot policy, which encourages Cubans to leave the island. There's still United States intervention within Cuba. The Congress has just recently passed $30 million worth of money to fund dissent and opposition within Cuba, so directly intervening in a foreign nation. So there's a long way to go. But at the same time, we as an organisation will spend a lot of time now celebrating many of the achievements of the Cuban Revolution, not only in health and education, but particularly in culture, music, dance and so on. We're organising exhibitions and events around the country, really looking at how Cuba has achieved something that I think we can all look to. Cuba's not perfect, but there's many things in Cuba that we can admire. And certainly people across the South, the developing world, look to Cuba as a sustainable model of development and one which they want to learn from.
Well, I'm certainly sold. We'll have to have you back, Rob. Thanks so much for joining us on board this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
And now, of course, it's time to hear what you think on the realms of digital and social media. What's buzzing away, Gayatri?
Well, Brussels, these suicide bombers, who created these monsters actually? Amy Wyatt says that terrorism against Muslims in the Middle East and in the West, racism, it's a feeling of not belonging, which is about right.
Definitely.
Ciaran says Saudi oil, wealth and Western greed.
I think, look, there's a lot of parties involved in this. It's a very, very busy situation, but it's annoying that we have to put labels, obviously, on nations and people, because no real religion obviously represents terrorism, does it? Absolutely not. Now, this US rapprochement with Cuba, is that President Obama's legacy, we asked. Keith Fox says, Obama said isolation has not worked. It's time for a new approach. It's actually the same intent with new methods. And Sean Caden says, clean water, free education and healthcare for all. The people of Detroit can but dream of that. So true. Viva Cuba. Exactly. And that's all that we've got time for this week. And that's the end of this episode of Sputnik, with me, Joseph Hyatt, standing in for George Galloway. And me, Gayatri. You can stay in touch with us on social media, on Twitter at RT_Sputnik, on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. Until next week, it's been marvelous.